Envelopes, that's an issue that we've been talking about. Would you like to touch on that as well?
Yeah, we've had an affidavit that specifically stated that when mail-in ballots were received, that so many of them were received that the standards reduced over time. They originally talked about there was initially 20 points of comparison on the signature, and then after some time they're told to go to 10 points of signature, 10 points of comparison, then 5, and then eventually they were just told to let every single mail-in ballot through. So we think it's important, understand with the course of our settlement, the only thing we can look at is blank signatures, but we think it's important to get the mail-in ballot images and see how many, if any, blank signatures came through, because that could have a material impact on the election.
Okay. Do we not have those images of the envelopes?
We do not have those images. Maricopa County has stated that they provided us with images of the envelopes, but specifically the folder they pulled into us on a specific drive has to do with voter registration details. It does not appear to have anything to do with the receiving of ballots. And I believe that, again, Bennett can tell you more about his interchanges with them, but specifically we asked them, so are you saying that in that folder we should have the envelopes that were utilized for ballots to be delivered in this past election? And the answer was basically there's envelopes in that folder, and it did not clearly answer our question.
So, Mr. Bennett, when you asked them or advised them that maybe they're mistaken, they're not here, could you send it again, or what was said?
I would simply recommend, Madam President, that they be re-subpoenaed as almost maybe a separate item and on a separate device, and it's not commingled with other folders or anything else.
But I guess her question is, what has been their response when you asked for? We need the images of the ballots.
Envelopes.
We need the images of the envelopes that were mailed. They said they gave us a file. It's not on the file. When you ask, you tell them we don't have those. What is the response? What has the response been to you?
It's on the Lacey 5 terabyte hard drive in a affidavits folder that's 1.83 terabytes big. And we keep looking for it and don't find it.
If I might add, I did an extensive forensic search for the mail-in ballots. The only images that are contained on the referenced Lacey drive are the original voter registration affidavits. Nothing to do with mail-in ballots.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay. So we will put that on the list of things to ask for. All right, so that brings us right into that list. Mr. Peterson, I'm going to let you take over at this point.
Well, I think, Madam President, you and I just we talked about so you've done a good job of letting us know what we've done, what's completed so far. We've heard a few things that we're missing. The President and I would like to know if you can tell us, just if you can kind of summarize or go through, tell us what do you guys need based off of what you've learned so far to have a complete forensic audit where we can have a complete and final report. So if you can share with us, what are those things that you would need to do that?
I think one of the key things that Mr. Cotton has talked about is we really need the Splunk logs in order to validate there was not any remote access to those systems in order to confirm any type of remote connectivity. And we requested
So we've covered that. I mean, anything that hasn't been mentioned already in the hearing. Do you have anything that because we've written, I believe the President and I have written all those things down. Is there anything that we haven't brought up that you would need to make this where you feel like it's a complete audit?
Yeah, so specifically when we talk about those changes to the voter rolls we talked about, and there's additional things we've seen that have changed in voter rolls over time that should not change. I think it would be very helpful if we could get a full backup copy of the database of voter rolls, specifically with information about who it was that made changes and when, and IP addresses and those details. so we can drill into why it is that some of these changes have taken place. I think we talked about chain of custody already. That's something that's extremely important for us to validate the chain of custody of everything from the point where the first ballot was sent to the point where we received stuff. We have full chain of custody of what we've covered, while it's been in our custody, but we need to know of it prior to that.
Okay.
So we understand that there may be some systems associated with the duplication of ballots that we have not forensically looked at. And as we've seen problems with duplication, if we're able to have access to those, we believe it would be very valuable in seeing what might be going on.
So what do you mean? What specifically, what are you looking for there?
Well, there's some software, I believe it's called Novus, that's used as part of the duplication process. There was actually a court case, I believe it was Ward via Jackson, where it was discovered that some of that duplication was not properly attributing results for the candidate the original had. And so being able to forensically look at that information would be helpful. And based on some analysis that Mr. Cotton has done, he does not see that within any of the data sets that we currently have. And so the question is whether the original subpoena was worded as such that we should have received that, or whether this is something that needs to be in a new request.
Okay. Anything else?
So any reports associated with the breach that is known about of the voter rolls with Maricopa County, that again will help with investigation that Mr. Cotton is putting together.
To be clear, you're talking about the breach that happened in the Maricopa County, sent letters out to the voters and saying, please be aware our system's been hacked or breached, and
Yes, ma'am.
we believe none of your personal information has been disclosed. That letter, that breach.
Correct.
Okay.
There's
thank you.
been minimal public information available about that, and any internal reports on what was discovered, the levels of the breach, and how far would be very helpful in our analysis as to whether the voting systems were impacted this election cycle.
Now, you weren't here at the time. I don't know if you know, Mr. Bennett. Do you remember, is this the same breach as the one where the FBI raided that house?
Yes,
I
ma'am.
don't know.
Doug
Yes,
is
ma'am, I
nodding.
believe so.
Mr. Logan, okay.
And, Mr. Cotton, I don't know if you want to chime in
I
on that.
believe that to be the same.
Okay, thank you.
So specifically, we'd like to request all portable media or external hard drives that contained election definitions, election results, backups, or similar data. We know from photos that we've seen from MTech that there was at least 3 orange drives, of which we received 1 of them. And reviewing the wording of the subpoena, portable media and external drives may not have been included if you were trying to take a very narrow view of what we requested. We believe there will be backups and other information that will be helpful in our analysis on those.
Okay.
So you need us to subpoena the 2 missing orange drives, missing
Well, I
drives?
think we
Or any
worded it
any portable
as any
drives.
portable media or external drives that have not been given prior subpoenas.
Okay, thank
They're
you.
associated with elections specifically.
Thank you.
We don't need any of the information we've already seen, so most of this stuff we've put caveats that we don't need things we already received. As we've heard the report that the election department shares a network with the sheriff's department, it'd be very helpful to have the network diagram to show how that is, and from our analysis standpoint, it'll make it easier for Mr. Cotton to hone in on what happened, and again, to look at things. I think we already talked about the backups of election management data. Digital copies of all versions of policies and procedures utilized associated with the election would be helpful. We've received verbal reports from a number of people that work for Maricopa County that indicate that some of the things we've seen don't actually comply with Maricopa County's policies and procedures, but without a copy of those, it's difficult for us to validate those. And we want to make sure that any finding we put into our report is something that be irrefutable, and we have the hard evidence to back it up. So getting those policies and procedures would be helpful in doing so.
Question, if I might. Question. Why would those not be public record and already produced somewhere? If they're procedures, election procedures?
Well, some levels of them are public and are available. But when I looked into specifically trying to see some of the ballot storage requirements and how they should be stored specifically as an example, there was not very detailed information. And usually you have guidance from a state, and then within a county, they'll have very specific, their interpretation of how they execute it. It's one of the reasons why it's so valuable with an audit to be able to have conversations with people, because there's things they do in Maricopa County they don't do that way anywhere else in the country. And not all those are necessarily wrong. You know, it's not about right or wrong, it's just different. So getting their policies and procedures so we know them and we're aware of them is something that's helpful. And some of that information they did send over with the original subpoenas, but there's additional, like I said, when I went through them, there's enough things that we ran through that I couldn't find specific documentation on that we were told they had specific guidance on, and we'd like copies of that.
Okay, so so some, through inferences, they're told they know how to do this. Well, how do we know how to do this? It's not in the procedure manuals. We need where they're getting this guidance and training.
Correct.
Okay.
And most governmental organizations have very clear and very precise policies and procedures for pretty much everything that's done. And so it should be something that's easy to procure. So we mentioned before about the blue sheets. Since we received these through another party, we'd like to specifically subpoena them so we know we have the official copies of them. They call them the tabulation logs. That was the official name that they utilized in them. And so that's, again, just to make sure that what we have is valid and real. We have no reason to expect that it's not, but it's just good to get it officially. Tied in with some of the things we ran into on the voter rolls, records of all mailed out ballots, everything that's available as far as what's mailed out and what was rejected, and validation that they were destroyed if they were rejected and came back. I've got a lot of things in here. They're specific to that, but for the brevity, So we'd like copies of all files transmitted for the purpose of duplicating damaged ballots or alternate format ballots, specifically to help us trace some of this information to make sure everything matches up and that it followed appropriately, because for things to be printed by a printer at Runbeck on duplicate ballots, they had to send a request over to them of some format and some data, and we'd like to be able to match that up with everything that we have. And we talked about the records of all paper distributed to vote centers and so forth. So additional information associated with adjudication of ballots would be helpful as we do our analysis on those and make sure that that conforms with expectations. That votes were cast over as far as what the process was, who was involved in it, and how they validated things with that. Specifically, we'd like information about the total count of all ballots sent to UOCAVA eligible voters, how they were sent and how they were received, because there's a number of different ways those votes can be received back. And we have some of the numbers with UOCAVA seem a little off, seem a little anomalous, and we'd like to get more documentation on that to make sure that we can have, if there's any anomalies that merit going into a report, that we have the information to know whether it belongs or doesn't. I think that's pretty much everything here. If we're talking about things generically, there's more specifics that I have listed, but.
Okay. Do we have more questions?
I don't at this point. I think I'm gonna have to circle back with them to get this list. I won't be able to make heads or tails out of
I'll
my
send you the document.
my quick chicken scratching there. So I'll get a clear. Go ahead.
So I think if